Amen. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. We started this book last week, and just to remind ourselves before we get into chapter 3 here, because a lot of people misapply the book of Ecclesiastes because they maybe don't understand kind of how it's written. And we learned last week that it's written by Solomon, David's son. And it's a time in his life when we could say he was backslidden from the Lord. He wasn't walking close with the Lord. He started out good as king. God appeared to him in a dream. He said, I'll give you whatever you want. Solomon goes, give me wisdom and understanding, and God gave him that. But then Solomon began to marry the very people God told him not to marry. Not just him, but actually all of his people. He started marrying a lot of people, 700 of them, but he started marrying people who didn't believe in the Lord. And God says, I don't want you doing that because they're gonna divide your heart. They're gonna distract you. That's exactly what happened to Solomon. He gets sucked into the religion of his wives, and he starts compromising. He gets in this season of backsliding, and that's kind of the state most likely that he's in while he's writing this book of Ecclesiastes more towards the end of his life. And he's kind of observing life. He's looking around the world, and he's writing down what he sees. And he uses the term a lot, under the sun, because that's his vantage point. That's his perspective. He's observing life on this planet, on this world, under the sun. A life that's void of having a relationship with God. So a lot of this stuff is actually just kind of flat out depressing because he's not looking at it in light of hope of knowing the Lord. And some of these things that he says in his observation are true for people who don't know the Lord, but they're not true for us who do have a relationship with Jesus. So we're trying to kind of point that out as we see things here. But as we start in chapter 3, he makes this very true observation, verse 1. He says, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. And then he kind of lists these like contrasts of seasons of times that exist in life. Verse 2, he says, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what was planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to build up and a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. And everything, Solomon says, when it comes to this life, and it's true, there's a season, there's times of things. And the key to kind of understanding seasons is you're understanding, you're recognizing the season that you're in, and we go through seasons in life. You're recognizing the season you're in, then you're also realizing that whatever season you're in, you're not going to be there forever. You're in a season, but you're not going to be there forever. And it's in all areas of life. People are young, and then they're maybe single, and then they get married, and there's a season of that. Then they have kids, and there's a long season of kids. And then the kids grow up, and they leave, hopefully. And then there's a long season of you just being alone as a couple. And then they start having grandkids, and you go into that season. And there's just these seasons of life. You get to recognize the season you're in, then you also have to realize that season is not forever. So enjoy what season you're in. And specifically, he talks about these seasons, verse 2. He goes, there's a time to be born and there's a time to die. There's a time to plant something into the ground, and then there's a time to pluck up, to harvest that thing that you planted. There's a time to kill, and there's a time to heal. There's a time to break down, and there's a time to build up. It just kind of depends on the season. People will go out and they will shoot deer or elk or bear or mountain lions or whatever they want this time of year, a time of killing. But then sometimes those exact same people who love hunting, which is great. I kind of like hunting, although I think general season's a joke nowadays, but we'll talk about that some other day. I wish they'd regulate the tags a little differently. But my point is those very same people that like hunting, maybe if a bird outside their house has a broken wing, they'll try to heal it. They won't just kill the thing. There's a time to kill, and there's also a time to heal depending on the season, depending on the situation. There's a time to break down, and sometimes there's a time to build up. There's a time to weep, a time to cry, and there's also a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn, and there's a time to dance. Oftentimes when I'm meeting with people before I do funerals, people will say, I just don't know if I'm going to get through without crying. And it's like, that's the point. You're supposed to cry. Like this is the season of weeping. And I actually told, it was Bill Bacon actually goes, I don't know if I'm going to get through Hannah's service without crying. I said, you better not. I said, I expect you to cry. I said, don't let me down. Like this is the season of weeping. Do your thing. You're supposed to weep. You're supposed to mourn when someone you love dies. That's okay. But also there's a time to be laughing. There's a time, verse 4, to be dancing. There's different seasons we go through. Verse 5, there's a time of casting away stones, and there's a time of gathering stones. There's a time to embrace, and there's a time to refrain from embracing. There's times you want to gather up stones. There's times you want to throw stones away. There's times you want to hug people, embrace people. There's other times you just want to refrain from that. Maybe when they haven't showered in a while, you're saying this is a season of refraining from embracing you. Verse 6, there's a time to gain. There's a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to throw away. Go through seasons of gain in your life, collecting a bunch of stuff, you're saving up a bunch of money, and you go through seasons of loss. You spend a bunch of money, you get rid of a bunch of stuff, whatever the case might be. A time of tearing, then a time of maybe sewing up what was torn up. A time, this is real good, verse 7, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. This is what we really need. This is a good thing to pray. Lord, I know that there's different seasons, and even in my day-to-day life, in different situations, there's different seasons. Give me wisdom on when to know when to just be quiet, when to be silent, and when to speak. Because there's plenty of times, I think, as Christians, where we need to speak up when we be silent, and there's also times when we should just shut up when we're speaking up. It's like, Lord, give us wisdom to discern the season that we're in, because none of it's bad. It's just kind of depending on what season you're in. Verse 8, there's a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. All of these different seasons that we see throughout just even our day-to-day lives, Solomon is observing here. Verse 9, he goes, in light of this, he goes, what profit has the worker from that in which he labors? What's the point? What's the value? Why am I even getting up and going to work? What profit do I have for the guy who's working and he's laboring, he's working hard all day? Like, where's the value in that? Because, verse 10, I've seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time, and he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work of God, the work that God does from the beginning to the end. God has made everything beautiful in its time. Mourning in a time of mourning is beautiful. Laughing in a time of mourning is off-putting. It's like, that's offensive. Crying in a time of joy is off-putting. Crying of sorrow. But everything in its season, there's a beauty to that, Solomon observes. And God's created that, but also he's put eternity into their hearts. Into whose hearts? The hearts of humanity. God has put eternity into the hearts of every single person. We have eternity inside of us in that sense. People kind of explain it this way. We have like a God-shaped hole inside of all of us, and the only thing that's going to satisfy that is Jesus coming in and taking residency inside of you as you put your faith and trust in him. But God's put an eternity into the hearts of everyone except, verse 11, here's the irony, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. He's put eternity there, but none of us really know what that means. God, you put an eternity in my heart. Explain eternity. Don't really know, but I know it's there. I know that nothing temporal satisfies it. I know that the only thing that satisfies the eternity inside of me that God has given me is him who is eternal. I know that when I try to fill that with something else that's temporal, I come to Solomon's conclusion that it's vanity, it's emptiness, it's not satisfying. But it's like God's given us this thing, this yearning for eternity, and yet we're not quite able to comprehend it. We can't quite fully understand or explain what it is. We just know it's there, and we know when it's satisfied with Jesus. Verse 12, I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. Now, Solomon's talking about people here who have eternity in their hearts, yes, but they don't know the Lord, who, like him, are not walking with the Lord. So their life is summed up like this. This is all they can have. Verse 12. I know that nothing is better for them than just to rejoice, to be happy, and to do good in their lives. And that sounds good, but that's vanity. That's emptiness. If all you got going for you is trying to be happy and trying to do good, you're going to not be content. You're going to not be satisfied. This is all the world can offer. And this is what we hear preached to us from the world. Just do whatever makes you happy. As long as you're a good person, that's all that matters. It sounds enlightening. It sounds spiritual. It sounds deep. Verse 13, he expands even more. Also, that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labors. Enjoy your work. It is a gift of God. Not all negative, not all a wrong concept, but if this is all you have going for in your life, no wonder your life feels empty. If life is just about you being happy and you trying to do good things to your neighbor or whatever, and you trying to just enjoy all you can, you're going to be dissatisfied because life is more than that. Life is about trying to please. Life is about trying to surrender over to the God who created you, and that's what's void of this equation. This, with Jesus, is not bad. You enjoying the labor of your hands and all the good stuff that God has given you, not bad if Jesus is in it. If Jesus isn't in it, you're going to come up empty. And then he makes the statement about the work of God in verse 14. He says, I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it that men should fear before him. I know, he says, verse 14, that whatever God does, it shall be forever. That's true. The work that God does is eternal work. God does forever, eternal work when he works. And that means even in our lives. When God does a work in our life, it's a forever work. It's an eternal work. It reminds me of what Paul says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, as he's writing there in the New Testament. Philippians 1, verse 6, whatever God does, it's eternal. Paul says this, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you, he's going to complete it until the day of Christ Jesus. God doesn't do temporary work. He does eternal work. His work is a forever work. And if he started a work in your life, that's a forever work that's begun in you, and he's going to see it through. He's going to complete it. Verse 14 goes on to say, nothing can be added to the work that God has done, his forever work. And nothing can be taken from it. God does it that men should fear before him. That which is has already been, and that which is to be has already been. And God requires an account of what is past. Pretty philosophical words there. That which has already been in the past, that which is has already been. This whole idea, remember last week he was on this kick of there's nothing new under the sun. Kind of the same idea. Just this recycling of ideas that goes throughout the world. That which has, it's already been. That which has to be, already has been. And God, he requires account of what is past. Verse 16, moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. And in the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. As I'm observing life under the sun, life on this planet, Solomon says, I've observed that in the very place of judgment, there was wickedness. Or we would say there's wickedness even in the courts. And that's true. You expect, courts to be fair and balanced, but they're not always. There's corruption, there's wickedness inside courthouses sometimes, and places of righteousness. We would maybe even call these churches. There's iniquity there. I'm expecting judgment in the courthouse, and there's wickedness. I'm expecting righteousness in places of righteousness, and yet there's sin and iniquity, Solomon says. I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. As he observes this, his conclusion is God's going to take care of it. God's going to judge it all. And this is true, and again, this sounds spiritual, and it is, but in a sense, some people use this as an excuse, this mindset. As they look around the world and they're not people who are walking with the Lord, they can make statements that they don't even fully understand, and they say things like, well, only God can judge me. And it's like, you better believe it. Only God can judge you, and he's going to. And you say that like it's a good thing, but you don't know him, so be careful. Because God is the only one who can judge you, and he is going to judge you. And if you don't know his son, your sin remains. So some people throw this out here, God is the judge of all, and it's not up to me to judge people. And I get the idea, but sometimes they say that just to sound spiritual, but they don't really mean what they're saying. Verse 18, I said in my heart, again he says, concerning the condition of the sons of men, God tests them. That word test is like sifting through sand, like looking for something. God tests them that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For what happens to the sons of men, to humanity, also happens to animals. One thing befalls them, as one dies, so dies the other. Surely they shall all have one breath. Man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. Now Solomon starts looking at humans and animals, and he goes, they're the same. He goes, humans die, animals die. No one escapes it, whether if you're furry or not, he says. And maybe humans are just animals. And he even says that, which is not true, verse 19, but he says at the end of it, man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. It's true that both of them die, both man and animals, but man has a huge advantage over animals. Because when God created man in Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 26, this is how he made them distinct, different. Genesis 1:26. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God created man to have dominion over animals. So does man have an advantage over animals? Yeah, you have dominion. You're in charge. And not only that, you also are made in God's image. Animals are not. So that's what makes us special. That's what makes us different, and that's what gives human beings value. The reason why you should value a human life more than the life of an animal is because mankind is made in the image of God, and Fluffy is not. And I know Fluffy's great, and you love Fluffy, and that's great. But if it's Fluffy versus an image-bearing person, image of God-bearing person, people come before animals. That morally, that's how it should be, because people are made in the image of God. This is what gives us value. And this is the problem, personal opinion, but I believe it's true. Most of my opinions are true. The problem is that in our world right now, with the way that people teach about how humans came into being, if all that we are is further evolved along animals, then that whole value of being made in God's image thing is taken out of the equation. If you're just a further evolved chimp or monkey or whatever you are, then you have no greater value than an animal. You are not just a further evolved animal, you're a distinct creation that's made in God's image. The world does not teach that, the world does not preach that, and that is why people who don't understand this truth struggle with seeing value in other human beings and seeing even their own value in themselves. You are valuable because God made you in his image. You're not an animal. You're a human being that's made in the image of God. So is everyone else. We have intrinsic value. Verse 20. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all return to the dust. Both man and animals, they die, you bury them in the ground, is his conclusion. And that's true. He's observing that, but just because both die doesn't mean they're both valued the same. That's where his observation is wrong. Verse 21, who knows the spirit of the sons of men, which goes upward, and the spirit of animals, which goes down to the earth? Now, some people use this verse as a statement. It's not a statement, it's a question. He's asking, who knows? Who knows? Man's spirit goes upwards and animal's spirit goes downwards. And so some people use this to say animals don't go to heaven. I don't know. I think Trapper will, because I've preached the gospel to him, but I don't know. But they go, well, it says people go up and animals go down. Well, he says, who knows? The idea, he's just throwing this out there. He's saying, I don't know what happens after they die. The people ascend up and animals go down. Verse 22, so I perceived that nothing is better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? No one can bring you to see what's going to happen after you, because when it's after you, you're no longer around. So his point is, you might as well just be rejoicing in your own work and your own labor. Your satisfaction, living under the sun, life without Jesus, your satisfaction, your joy, your happiness is completely contingent upon how well you can find satisfaction in the work that you put in. And if your work isn't very fun, bummer for you, because I guess you're not going to be real happy. So this is the depressing part of what Solomon's observing of a life without the Lord. All you get out of life is what you can put into it when you don't know Jesus. Chapter 4, verse 1. Then I returned, and I considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. And look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressor there is power, but they have no comforter. I'm looking around, I see people being oppressed by, their masters, whether it's a slave-master relationship, by their government, by whoever has more power than them. I'm seeing these people be oppressed, I'm seeing them cry, and I'm realizing no one's there to bring them comfort. Verse 2, therefore I praised, this is real sad, therefore I praised the dead who were already dead more than the living who are still alive. I started thinking, we're better off dead than alive. If life is all you can just make of it, and it's contingent upon you, and say you're not real successful, so someone's oppressing you, and you're full of tears and being oppressed, and no one's around to comfort you, he goes, I start evaluating this, and I think, people who are dead are better off than people who are alive. And he even goes a step further, verse 3, yet better than both he who never existed, who is not seeing the evil work that is done under the sun. He goes, it'd be even better if none of this even happened, if nobody was even born, if they never even had to be exposed to evil. Again, Solomon's in a place where he has no hope, so this is what he's observing. And this is a lot of people's worldview. This is a lot of people's life. This is a lot of people's conclusion of what life is all about, because they don't know Jesus. Probably your neighbor who doesn't know the Lord, if you'd really dissect his worldview, he'd fall into this category. The Bible talks about, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Live it up now, because that's all there is right now. And Solomon goes, if that's really true, and this world is as evil as I'm observing, and it is evil, it'd be better off if we just didn't even exist in the first place. Verse 4, again I say, that for all the toil and every skillful work a man is envied by his neighbor, this also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Even if you're super skillful in what you do, and you're just the best artist or the best concrete guy or the best carpenter, and your neighbors even envy how good you are at it, even if you're so good, all that skill, it's just vanity. It's like grasping at the wind. There's no substance. There's no satisfaction. Verse 5, the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. The fool is self-consumed, folds his hand, and he's consuming himself in the lifestyle that he's living. Verse 6, better a handful with quietness than both hands full together with toil, grasping at the wind. It's better to have less, one handful, and have quietness, peace, contentment, than to have both of your hands full of stuff and realize at the end of the day that none of that stuff actually matters, and you're just grasping at the wind. You're grasping at emptiness. I just like how he says in verse 6, it's better to have a handful with quietness. This reminds me of what we saw this past Sunday morning in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 11, when Paul told us this, that we as followers of Jesus should aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you. Live a quiet, simple life, mind your business, work with your hands. Solomon says it's better to have a little bit with a quiet life than to have both hands full of stuff from this world and realize there's nothing to it. Verse 7, he goes, then I returned and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone, without companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labor, nor is his eye satisfied with riches. But he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is vanity and a grave misfortune. As he continues to observe, he now observes a lonely person. He says there's one who's alone, without companion. He doesn't have any sons, he doesn't have any brothers, and he says, yet there is no end to all of his labor. Yet he's just working hard every single day, going to work, putting in the grind. He goes, nor is his eyes satisfied with riches. He never has enough. But he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is vanity and a grave misfortune. You're single, you're alone, you have no kids, you have no siblings, you're working your tail off to gain all this stuff, and the thought never crosses your mind, who am I doing this for? It's just me. It's lonely. In the next verse, he's going to start this section contrasting this one who's alone with two. And he makes a statement in verse 9. He says, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. He talks about a lonely person. Now he's talking about someone who's not alone. He's talking about two. And, I was actually thinking of this, today. Some people see my loneliness as like an inability to minister to people. But even as I look around this room tonight, I think there might be more single people who are here tonight than married people. And I think that's good because I have a way to connect with people who go home to a quiet house that if I was just a married pastor with a bunch of stinking kids, it'd be hard for me. And one day I'll maybe have that. But it's like, my point is, I don't see my loneliness as an inability to minister. I actually see it as an opportunity to relate with the majority of people, maybe even in this room. We're kind of on the same season when it comes to that. But he says, verse 9, two are better than one. I guess it depends on who the other person is. But two is better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. You can kind of benefit from each other, he says. Verse 10, more about how two is better than one. He says, for if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Two is better than one. He goes, just think about it logically. You're walking with someone, there's two of you, one of you falls, the other one can help you up. But if you're flying solo, if you're alone and you fall, there's no one there to help you. And although I am alone, and many of you, quite honestly, are alone, we're alone, but we're not alone, because in Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, Paul tells us this about this thing that we exist in called the church. He says, brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness, considering yourselves, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. There's a bearing of each other's burdens that we can share with each other, even though you might be single or alone. In the church, there's still not an isolationness to it. There's still a togetherness that we have. But his point is, if you're alone or if you're alone, you can fall. No one's there to help you up. Verse 11, he says again, if two people lie down together, they're going to keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Two blankets. That's how that works. You just put an extra layer on. Verse 12, though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. One may be overpowered by another, but two can withstand him. The idea, you might be able to whip me, but you can't whip me and my buddy. Right? One against one, maybe you'll get me. But if there's two on my side and one coming against me together, you're probably not going to be able to withstand me. And then he says a threefold cord is not quickly broken. A lot of people use these verses in weddings, and they're fine for that. He says this three strand cord, it's not as weak as one. It's not as weak as two. It's strong, the three. And He's been talking about two, and then at the end of verse 12, he says three. If you've been to a wedding that uses this verse, most people apply this, and I think it's cute, to Jesus. It's you and your spouse, and it's Jesus, and that's the three-fold cord that is not easily broken. It's the two of you in a relationship with him. What I do find interesting, Solomon talks about the issue of being alone in verse 8. He talks about the benefit of having another person in verse 9 in that section. But Solomon says two is better than one. Solomon does not say four is better than one, 5 is better than one, 700 is better than one. And when he's writing this, he has 700 wives. So he goes from, alone's not the best, two is better. But if you're thinking two is good, maybe if I compound this, it's going to keep getting better. No, it starts getting worse again. So from a guy who has a bunch of wives, his conclusion is two is good. Not two wives, but you and her. Two total, counting you, meaning one other is enough. Verse 13, better a poor and a wise youth than an old and foolish king who will be admonition no more. It's better to have a young, poor, wise guy, not in a funny sense, literally a wise person, a young, poor, wise person, than to have an old king who cannot be instructed, who does not listen, who thinks that he knows it all. For he comes out of prison to be king, although he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who walked under the sun. They were with the second youth who stands in his place. There was no end of all the people over whom he was made king. Yet those who come afterwards will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and grasping for wind. Chapter 5, verse 1. Walk prudently when you go to the house of God, and draw near to hear, rather than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they do evil. When you walk towards the house of God, you want to do so prudently or carefully. You want to walk carefully as you're going into the house of God. And when you get close, when you draw near, your attitude needs to be drawing near to hear. I'm coming to hear. I'm coming to listen. I'm coming to receive from you, Jesus. Don't have this idea of I got to show up and I just need to make this great sacrifice in order for this thing to count. In order for my hour and a half on a Wednesday night to count, I got to show up and make a big old sacrifice. No. Come near and hear. Just come and receive from me, the Lord says. Don't get caught up into thinking you have to make these great sacrifices like the fools, because they don't even realize that they're not even pleasing me, that they're actually just doing evil. Verse 2, do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hasty before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. Do not be rash with your mouth, or out of control with your mouth. Yeah, we've referenced this verse when we were in Proverbs not too long ago, but in James chapter 1, verse 19, James says it this way. He says, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Quick on the listening department, slow in the speaking department. We don't want to be rash with our words. Specifically, Solomon says we don't want to be rash with our mouth when it comes to this. And let not your heart utter anything hasty before God. For, here's the reason why, God's in heaven and you're down here on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. Don't be rash when you speak. Specifically, don't be rash, out of control, not thoughtful when you're speaking to God. In this context, verse 3-4, a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. A fool can be identified very quickly by how much they talk about what they don't know about. You can be like, you're doing a lot of talking for not knowing much. And Solomon says you can pick them out right away. In Proverbs 10, verse 19, Solomon said this about a fool and his many words. Proverbs 10, verse 19, he says, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. So, not rash with our words towards God, Because now, verse 4 of Ecclesiastes 5, when you make a vow to God, here's the context, making vows. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. If you're going to vow to God, you better do what you say. Pay up. Don't promise God things and then don't do it. Don't be rash in your communication to God. If you're going to say you're going to do something, you need to do it. You need to pay it up. Or, verse 5, here's even better. He says, better not to vow than to vow and not pay. And we generally don't use the term, I vow to God. Here's what people say instead. I swear to God. I swear to God I'm going to do this. Really? You better do it then. If not, just don't do it. Just don't even say it. Don't bring God into it. If you're going to swear to God, you better be sure you're going to do it. If not, just don't say it. Jesus would teach we just need to let our yes be yes and our no be no. So watch out for that, verse 6. Do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the works of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there is also vanity, but fear God. If you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness and province, do not marvel at the matter, for high officials watches over high official, and higher official are over them. When you see oppression, as you observe life under the sun on this earth, when you see people oppressed, when you see violent perversion, when you see justice and righteousness not being done, don't marvel at that. Don't be amazed. Don't be shocked when people are oppressed under the sun on this planet, he says, because there's higher officials watching over, and over them there's higher officials. His point is there's corruption throughout the ranks. It shouldn't surprise you that people use their power to oppress people. Verse 9, moreover, the profit of the land is for all. Even the king is served from the field. The profit, the produce of the land is for everyone. The king has to eat from the same field as anyone else. So the land brings profit for all. Verse 10, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. Someone who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver. We would say money. Someone who loves money is not going to be satisfied with money. You think you would, because if money's what you love, you think that the more that you get of it, the more satisfied you'll be with it. But that's the deception of loving silver or loving money. You think if you get it, you'll finally be satisfied. But like we've seen throughout Proverbs and now here in Ecclesiastes, that's not how it works. And you've probably lived it. We kind of talked about this last week, but we'll apply it now specifically to what he's talking about here, finances. If you are not content in the state you're in now, you will not be more content making $1,000 more or $5,000 more or $100,000 more. If you think you're going to gain contentment by gaining more money, you're wrong. You have to be content in the current state you're in, or you'll never be content in the next state you're going to be in. Contentment will follow you all the days of your life if you cannot come face to face with just being satisfied with what God's giving you today. It's okay to have desires and to want to have financial goals and all this stuff, but you got to be okay where you're at today. If you're always thinking it's the next promotion, it's the next pay raise, it's the next tax bracket, that's what's going to get it, you're not going to find contentment there. You're going to love silver and you're never going to be satisfied. Verse 10 goes on to say, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. What he's speaking about here, like I mentioned, is learning to have a content life. And in 1 Timothy chapter 6, starting in verse 6, Paul talks about having a content life. 1 Timothy 6, he says, now godliness with contentment is great gain. Here's how we need to think about things. Verse 7, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we can carry nothing out. You started this planet with a zero net worth. You had nothing you brought to the scene. You didn't even have clothes. You came naked into this place. He says you started with nothing, and it is certain that when you leave this place, you get to take nothing with you. That great severance package, that 401k, that new car, it's staying here. It does not get to go with you. Verse 8, and having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. You got food, you got clothing, that's where you should be able to be content. Your basic needs are met. Okay, Jesus, thank you for that. I got vision, I got goal, I want to grow, that's fine, but I'm content. I'm not looking to be satisfied with these next things, with these next levels. Verse 9, but those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, a trap, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness, and they've pierced themselves through with many sorrows. The love of money, not being content with the basics, food and clothing, food and shelter, and this desire that I'm only going to be satisfied, I'm only going to really feel like a man if I could make more, if I could get more. Paul says there's people that have just walked away from Jesus with that attitude because they got so distracted with what they thought they could get out of this world. So he just warns against it. Godliness with contentment is great gain. It's never enough, so you need to just realize if it's never going to be enough, I better learn how to be happy with what I have. Verse 11, back in Ecclesiastes 5, when goodness increases, they increase who eat them. So what profit have their owners except to see them with their eyes? When goods increase, you get more resources, so increases those who gobble up those resources. Or the more you get in, the more you send out. It's just, I don't know why it just works that way. Oh, wow, I got this great raise, I got more money. It's like, well, you're going to spend it. People are just going to come and gobble it up somehow, some way. So his point, you can't be secured in that. You can't be trusting in that. Verse 12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats a little or much. But the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. The sleep of the laboring man, not the boss, the laborer who doesn't own anything, is just a common employee. He has sweet sleep. And he sleeps good at night, whether if he has a full stomach or not. But the guy who's got all this stuff in his life, but the abundance of the rich, they will not permit him to sleep. You've ever had your stuff not permit you to sleep? You know, you got so much stuff you need to take care of before winter comes or whatever, and you lay there in bed and you think, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do this, I got to do that, and take care of all this stuff I worked so hard to gain, and yet now you can't even get rest because your life is wasted. Your life is so busy working to maintain all this stuff you gained, and you can't even have rest at night. He says in verse 13, there is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun. Severe evil, what is this going to be? Murdering? Adultery? What's the severe evil? Verse 13, riches kept from their owner to his hurt. I've observed a real severe evil, Salmon says, that riches have been kept for their owner to his own hurt. Solomon goes, it's an evil thing that I see, that people are actually being hurt by the very things they work to possess. This is it. I got this thing. I have to have this toy. I got to have that boat. And I'm not against boats, but I actually don't love boats, but because I can't swim. But I'm sure they're cool. But you have all these great things, and you're like, this is it. But then those things might actually end up hurting you. And the very thing you work so hard to obtain is actually harming you. It's actually hurting you. And then you get stuck. You become a slave to it. I mean, the American dream is filled with people who are slaves to their toys. They don't get to go to work. They have to go to work so they can pay off the camper and the side-by-side and the 2 new cars and the house. And they live in a place that they don't even like, but they have to live there because that's where the money's at. So they're working a job they don't like in a place they don't like so that they can afford the payments. But they have to work overtime to afford the payments so they can't even enjoy the toys that they like. And like literally America's filled with these people. And they're just hurting themselves. And they think they're living the dream. And Solomon's saying, wake up. This is not what life is about. Your stuff, it might actually be hurting you. And I actually heard this, and I believe it. Whatever in your life that you say, I can't get rid of that thing, you better go home and get rid of it because it's got you, you don't got it. I just can't get rid of that. Sounds like it's got a hold of you. Get rid of it. And if it's a four-wheeler, give it to me. Verse 14. We're almost done here. But those riches, they perish through misfortunes. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. It's evil to see possessions possess people and maybe even hurt them. It's also hard to watch riches perish in misfortune or in bad investments. Verse 15, as he came from his mother's womb naked, so shall he return to go as he came. And he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. Not a good lifestyle. All of his days are in darkness. He's eaten away, but there's just no satisfaction in his life. Verse 18, here is what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of all of his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on the day of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joys of his heart. Kind of ends on a good note there. But what's interesting throughout the whole book of Ecclesiastes, I forget if it's 1 or 0. It's either 1 or 0 times, but I'm thinking it's 0. Solomon never mentions the name of God, capital Lord. He just talks about God in kind of a more broader sense in which a lot of people talk about God. He doesn't call him by name in the way that he wants his people to know him. So although he's doing a lot of God talk, it's still void of that deep relationship that God desires to have with his people. So life's full of emptiness, life's full of vanity, life's full of no purpose if all you have is you. If all you have is your work and your labor and what you can produce and what you can enjoy, you're going to enjoy it until you don't. And then you're gonna wind up empty. You're gonna wind up with that eternity that God placed in you, not satisfied. Life in Jesus is where satisfaction and contentment is, and that's where you're able to be in a position of having food and clothing and saying, "Thank you, Lord. This is enough. Thank you for everything else that you've given me, but Lord, I'm content in this. If I'm content in this, then when the promotion comes." Then when you get a bigger house, then when you finally get that boat, you can enjoy it, but you're free to enjoy it because it's not hurting you, because it's not possessing you, because your joy, your contentment, your satisfaction is not tied up, expected, placed on the thing. It's coming from Jesus, whether if the boat runs good or not. That's freedom. Solomon is discovering that these people do not have freedom. In Jesus, we have freedom. Freedom from stuff. We get to enjoy it, but that stuff doesn't have to have us, and it sure doesn't have to ruin our day when it doesn't work out right. Does that make sense? Okay. Next week, we'll probably look at 3 more chapters, so you can read ahead, chapters 6, 7, and 8. We'll be through Ecclesiastes here before we know it. And then this Sunday, we're finishing up the book of 1 Thessalonians, so read ahead in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Great way to end the book. Super good chapter. This Sunday is just going to be a great one with Justin Gambino here doing worship. We're going to do communion. We're going to finish up 1 Thessalonians. So join us for that. Let's pray, and we'll get out of here. Before we pray, let's sing.